Axios. So what the news is it says the student was arrested for 6 months in prison. And it's China, so you expect it. But it's a student who is there from while he was in the United States. He tweeted about, this was in Chinese court documents. It contained images deemed to be unflattering portrayals of a national leader. And it would be this guy. Okay, let's see if I can get it. See him? Okay, here are the tweets. They're anime or animated characters. Is this from, I'm trying to remember. This is what he allegedly posted. Beep. Unflattering, rather racist looking, but Chinese student that didn't like. They said that why this matters. The case represents a dramatic escalation of the Chinese government's attempts to shut down free speech and global expansion of a Chinese police campaign to track down Twitter users in China who posted critical content of the Chinese government. Senator Ben Sasse, a Republican of Nebraska, called on China to release the student. This is what ruthless and paranoid totalitarianism looks like, said Sassy? Sassy would be cooler. Oh, Rory, you're in such trouble. Okay, so according to official court document dated November 5th, 2019, last year, Chinese police detained the 20-year-old Lao Daiping is correct, in July of 2019 in Wuhan, his hometown, where the liberal arts students had returned after the end of spring semester. So he was overseas here, and he went back to China to visit his family, and they detained him. And they said in September and October of 2018, while he's studying at the University of Minnesota, Liu used his Twitter account to post more than 40 comments denigrating the national leader's image and indecent pictures. Now I kind of want to know what the indecent pictures are. They created a negative social impact. So he's been in jail for months for like this kind of thing. I don't think it's indecent. We're used to in America doing worse, so I get it. It's a different country, but the request for comment sent to Liu's university email account received no reply, probably because he's in jail and he doesn't get access to email. So Axios, this website, found a Twitter account known to Liu was opened in September 2018, and the last tweet is from June 2019, 1 month before Liu was detained. One tweet superimposed a Chinese government slogans over the images of Lawrence Limburger, a cartoon villain who bears a resemblance to Chinese President Xi Jinping. So anyway, the account was also retweeted several images of Winnie the Pooh, a character currently censored in China, after Chinese netizens made an unflattering comparison to see. So a lot of people are doing it, and they're trying to stop this unflattering comparison. So Chinese students in the U.S. need to know that they may be subject to surveillance. If they plan on ever going home to China, you need to be very careful about what you're posting. Even on social media, which you don't think anybody is going to care about, you could end up in jail. So think about that. Is that fair? We live in this global world where this kind of thing is pretty normal to make fun of political leaders, but that they can get you. And what's to stop other countries from doing the same thing? So Chinese police are tracking down and silencing Twitter users who post content critical to the Chinese government, even from abroad. So this is American free speech puts a spotlight on Chinese censorship. So, just to reiterate, this guy, they think this student posted that he looks like this guy, and that's all it took to go to jail. This is why, kids, we need to protect free speech, because if even like you make a joke about something and someone gets a little bit butthurt, this is what it can lead to: detention, illegal. At least we have it protected for now, but how long? So think about it. That leads me to another sense of censorship. Ugh, Heather, what are you doing? Censorship that just happened lately was at the National Archives. There was erasure. They're erasing history. One of the things that people were protesting in the Women's March. I have friends and family and relatives who have all participated in the Women's March, and I was working but also taking pictures of people throughout the day and all around, and I'm very proud of the women that marched, and it was a great show of solidarity. However, the censorship happened. Here's an example picture. Boop. Didn't that work? People had signs, and signs that had anything anti-Trump, they found at the National Archives were suddenly blurred out. Any of the words that said, "Keep your tiny hands off of me," and it was like a cat. They censored a bunch of images. And a photographer named Ellen Shub died near Boston at the age of 73. And at that time, she was already a well-known chronicler of social protest. And this role that she had taken very seriously. And she had pictures of something that said, no more back alley abortions. And they talked about photography of women who are holding the signs and how important documenting history of social changes. And sometimes it may not be something that makes the government look good, and it may not be something that makes our own government leaders look good. But just to tie, like with China, yes, sometimes our leaders are deserving of not looking good because they have done horrible things or said horrible things. And it needs to be highlighted. Part of what makes our country run so well is that we have social commentary, and the power of the people working together is what can make things really happen. So I was pretty astounded to see that there were altered photographs from the Women's March and from 2017 in Washington because they had altered the signs in a photograph. And this is the one they're talking about. I'm going to show you a little picture. Maybe when I get my technology skills up to snuff. Okay. So if you can see, it's really hard to see unless it's stuff that's up close. But there are blurred images on some of the signs. And you go, what is that about? It is anything that was Trump. Trump commentary was blurred out. So people are outraged, and you expect it from very pro, like from Republicans, obviously. Anybody that's in the Trump house, yes, of course you see that. But the National Archives should be separate from that and shouldn't be above and away from censorship. So they were not. And they have been called upon, and everyone is angry about it, especially in this time when we have impeachment hearings, and there's a lot going on in the world where it's very suspicious when they censor something like art or photos that should be untouched. I mean, except for what maybe the original photographer did, it shouldn't be something like that. So the swift media reaction was probably instrumental in correcting the record. They came back and said that they're sorry for what they did, and there was no rational effort will ever bring them back. They talked about documenting the Soviet practice of, the word is new to me, leading people, objects, and facts from photographs. And it's to make things more positive and change the spin. And it is a very wrong thing to do. You're changing history. And there's a question that's come up because we live in a society where You can get rid of wrinkles. You can get rid of dark under eye circles. You can get rid of like blemishes, which we all have, right? There's no filter on real life, and to get rid of something important like that, especially from an organization that their main purpose is to preserve history, preserve what has happened in the moment, and we'd hope that they would. So hopefully the public outcry that has gone on lately will put a stop to this, but I am not entirely sure that is true. So that was just a... Where did I get this one? It's by Masha Gessen. I think. Let's say at the very end, maybe, if I'm lucky. Nope. Washington Post, I think. So, sometimes I cut things off when I'm in a hurry. That's the way it goes. Before I get into my final article, one thing I'm thinking about doing, and I may do it this weekend, is I saw something fun about Reese Witherspoon is seeking a book club librarian in residence. I'm sure every single... Oh, I look really red. Reese Witherspoon putting the word out will probably get every librarian under a rock to sign up for this. But I'm going to try to apply for it and see. I could be the book club librarian in residence. I would have a lot of fun doing it. So, if you have tips for me on how I can win this bad boy, it says I have to be comfortable on camera, well-versed in Reese Book Club books, and well-read overall. I could do that. Be passionate about book clubs and book culture. I'm a librarian, yo. Are enthusiastic and fun-loving. Well, normally I'm more enthusiastic and fun-loving than today, but I can work on that, I promise. And have experience as a librarian. Y'all, I'm a librarian, y'all. So I'm thinking about doing that. I think that would be fun. And that was actually like highlighted in the Intellectual Freedom site. So I know they are going to get like 1 billion people signing up and sending in things, but it could be me. I would love that. Reese Witherspoon is awesome. I love her. And I love the idea of being like a virtual book club librarian and getting people really excited about, especially books that celebrate women and are kind of cool. You know, part of why I became a librarian is because I want to help women. I want to help young people succeed. I want to get the word out about how cool it is to read and find good resources. I love finding hidden things and exposing the truth, and the truth is out there, and I think that would be really cool. So tell me what you think. You think I should do it? Think I should do it? Do it. Just do it, Heather. Okay. So last one before my mad scurry to clean up cat barf before it's too late. And if you see me jump up and run, that's what I'm doing. I'm just kind of like, I'm hoping I can finish the show and then I'll have time to do it and I can pull the rug out. Of course cats have to throw up on a rug. They never just throw up on a hardwood floor. What the hell? It's probably just because it's more comfortable for them. Anyway, so what I found was this really cool, amazing article about the secret history of facial recognition. It is amazing, guys. Did you know that 60 years ago, a sharecropper's son invented a technology to identify faces? The record of his role is all but vanished. How does something so important to us that people spend millions and billions of dollars on disappear into the framework of history? Well, his name was Woody Bledsoe. And who was he working for? What was he doing? Let's talk about it. So I feel like there should be some musical number in right there. If I was smart, maybe later or someday I'll put history. Yeah. Okay. So they talk about Woody Bledsoe. Woody Bledsoe, which first of all, his name's Woody. I love that name. How cool is that? You need to make a movie about this guy. Somebody go run out and write up a script because this is so cool. He was sitting in a wheelchair in his open garage waiting. To anyone who had seen him a few months earlier, anyone accustomed to greeting him on Sundays at the local Mormon church or to spotting him around town on jogs, the 74-year-old would have been all but recognizable. The healthy round cheeks that he maintained for much of his life were sunken. He had a degenerative disease, ALS, which had taken away his ability to speak and walk, leaving him barely able to scratch out short messages on a portable whiteboard, which I just flipped in my mind. But Woody's mind was still sharp. He was valuable. And when his son Lance arrived at the house in Austin, Texas, which, by the way, I'm going to in May, so I'm going to go see if I can learn more about Woody Bledsoe when we are in Austin, Texas in May. So excited. That morning in early 1995, Woody began immediately to issue instructions in dry erase ink. He'd been thinking about this. He told his son Lance to fetch a trash can from the backyard, one of old metal kinds that Oscar the Grouch lives in. Ah, you know it. So Lance grabbed one of it and set it down near his father. Then Woody sent him in the house for matches and lighter fluid. Where is this going? It is crazy. So Lance got back. Woody motioned for 2 large file cabinets inside the garage. They'd been around ever since Lance could remember. Now in his late 30s, Lance was pretty sure they hadn't been opened since he was a kid, and he knew they weren't regular file cabinets. He hesitated. They were the same kind he'd seen when he worked on sonar equipment for the U.S. nuclear submarines, fireproof and very heavy, with a strong combination lock on each drawer. His father slowly began writing numbers on a whiteboard, and to Lance's astonishment, the combination worked. As I opened the first drawer, he told me 25 years later, I felt like Indiana Jones. Guys, this gets crazy. A thick stack of old rotting documents lay inside. Lance began removing them and placing them in his father's hands. Woody looked them over the piles of paper 2 inches at a time, and then he had his son toss them into the fire as he started in the burn barrel. Some, Lance noticed, were marked classified or for eyes only. Flames kept building until both cabinets were almost empty. Woody insisted on sitting in the garage until all that remained was ash. Lance could only guess at what he helped to destroy. For nearly 3 decades, his father had been a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, working to advance the fields of automated resonating and artificial intelligence. Lance had always known to him to be a wide-eyed scientific optimist, the sort of man who, as far back as late 1950s, dreamed of building a computer endowed with all the capabilities of a human, a machine that could prove complex mathematical theorems, engage in conversation, and play a decent game of ping pong. Oh, be right back. Wait! There, don't step on that. Ooh. Okay, I'm recording. Saved the day. Okay. That was exciting. Hi, Andy. So anyway, where was I? So he was burning his father's documents, and it was crazy. He didn't know what he was up to. This guy had been developing automated reasoning and artificial intelligence. So he's like, my dad's in a wheelchair. Why does he want to burn all these documents? He must figure he's going to die soon, so he better get rid of any evidence of whatever he's working on. Ooh. So, next, his father had been working on this since the 1950s, and he dreamed of building a computer. Basically, he wanted to make an android, something that could think and do stuff and play games and be like us. But early in his career, Woody had been consumed with an attempt to give machines one particular, relatively unsung, but dangerously humanly powerful capacity, the ability to recognize faces. So Lance knew that his father's work in this area, and it was one of the earliest research on facial recognition technology had attracted the interest of the U.S. government's most secretive agencies. Woody's chief funders, in fact, it seemed to have been the front companies for the CIA. So yeah, the CIA has been involved in facial recognition since the very beginning. Had Lance just incinerated the evidence of Washington's first efforts to identify individual people on a mass automated scale? Probably. So today, facial recognition is obviously a security feature of choice for phones and laptops and passports and payment apps, etc. And it promises to revolutionize the business of targeted advertising. It's already happening. So it's big business. But where did it come from? So this is why this is so interesting to me. It's also been a tool of state oppression and constant surveillance, and something that we need to pay attention to. But it is a little disheartening to me to think that it came out of not the hope for total invention and making life better, but under the support of a government where they wanted to originally just use it to watch people. So today, Woody's facial recognition Woody's facial recognition research in the 1960s prefigured all of these technological breakthroughs and their quasi-ethical implications. And yet his early foundational work on the subject is almost entirely unknown. When you burn all your documents about your research, people aren't going to know about it. And usually people find a way to secretly save it, and not this guy. So, fortunately, however, Woody's intentions may have been that day in 1995. The bulk of his research and correspondence appears to have survived the blaze in his garage. What? Thousands of pages of paper, 39 boxes worth of such, reside at Briscoe Center for American History at the University of Texas. These contain, among other things, dozens of photographs of people's faces, some of them marked up with strange mathematical notations, as if the human subjects were afflicted with some kind of geometrical skin disease. In those portraits, you can see a discern of origin story of technology that would only grow more fraught, more powerful, and ubiquitous in the decades to come. So, here's a picture of Woody Bledsoe, and the computer fails to recognize two photos of him from 1945 and 1965 that showed the same person. So just an example of the kind of mathematical equations that they were trying to do to figure out facial recognition. So it's a mathematical equation. Woodrow Wilson Bledsoe, that's his name. So Woody was Woodrow Wilson Bledsoe. Always Woody to everyone he knew, could not remember a time when he did not have to work. He was born in 1921 in the town of Maysville, Oklahoma, and spent much of his childhood helping his father, a sharecropper, keep the family afloat. There are 12 Bledsoe kids in his family. Woody was the 10th, spent all days weeding corn, gathering wood, picking cotton, and feeding chickens. So this is just an amazing story. You think about how far he came from being a little boy picking cotton and doing sharecropping to being one of the innovators for making facial recognition software and AI. It's impressive. His mother was a former school teacher and recognized his intelligence early on, and in an unpublished essay from 1976, Woody described her as an encouraging presence, even if her encouragement led him to that. When his father died when he was 12, he was in deep poverty because it's a Great Depression. Who's that? Oh, it's Zoe girl. Hi. I see kitties in my background. She's the good one. You've seen two cats in one show. That's a lot. So he had an aptitude for math, and they talk about where he was put in charge of a payroll office at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, where wave after wave of U.S. soldiers were being trained for combat. He said, "Our group handled all black troops," he wrote, "which was a new experience for me." Then on June 7th, 1944, the day after D-Day, Woody was finally deployed to Europe, where he earned a Bronze Star for devising a way to launch large naval vessels built for beach landings into the Rhone. Ended in European theater just as Allied troops were accelerating to victory, Woody seems to have an unusually positive experience of the war. I mean, he wasn't there for very long. These were exciting times, he wrote. Each day is an equivalent to a month of ordinary living. I can see why men get enamored with war. As long as you are winning and don't sustain many casualties, everything is fine. He spent the following summer in liberated Paris, his mind and his experience of the world expanding wildly in an atmosphere of sometimes euphoric patriotism. The most sensational news I ever heard was that they had exploded an atomic bomb, Woody wrote. We were so glad that such a weapon was in the hands of Americans and not our enemies. It makes you kind of wonder, does it matter? Woody couldn't wait to get back to school once the war had ended. He majored in math at the University of Utah and finished in 2.5 years. He was pretty much a genius. Then he went off to Berkeley for his PhD. He was an accelerated student. So after grad school, he got a job at the Sandia Corporation in New Mexico, working on government-funded nuclear weapons research alongside such luminaries as Stanislaw Ulam, one of the inventors of the hydrogen bomb. In 1956, Woody flew to the Marshall Islands to observe weapons tests, parts of which to this day suffer worse radioactive contamination than Chernobyl or Fukushima. It was satisfying to me to be helping my own dear country remain the strongest in the world, he wrote. So he was drinking the Kool-Aid. But what made him make this jump to facial recognition? So after Sandia, they also offered Woody his first steps into the world of computing, which is big business and growing by leaps and bounds back then. It would consume him for the rest of his career. At first, his efforts at writing code tied directly into the grim calculations of nuclear weapons research. One early effort, programmed for computing possibilities of fallout from large-scale thermonuclear attack, took into account explosive yield, burst points, time of detonation, mean wind velocity, and the like to predict where the fallout would land in case of an attack. Kind of reminds me of War Games, that movie with Matthew Broderick and Sarah Jessica Parker back in the day, the 80s. But his romance with computing grew. Woody took an interest in automated pattern recognition, especially the machine reading, the process of teaching a computer to recognize unlabeled images of written characters. So he teamed up with his friend and colleague Ivan Browning, a polymath inventor, aeronautical engineer, and biophysicist, and together they created what would become known as the n-tuple method. They started by projecting a printed character, the letter Q, say, onto a rectangular grid of cells, resembling a sheet of graph paper. Then each cell was assigned a binary number, according to whether it contained part of a character. Empty got a 0, populated got a 1. So it's looking for an equation that equals that filled space, and that equals a Q. The groupings could, in theory, include numbers of cells, hence named the n-tuple. With a few further mathematical manipulations, a computer is able to assign a character grid a unique score. So, I mean, you can jump forward in this and realize that you could have a score for faces, you could have a score for images, and faces are usually in certain spots. There's like a distance between everything, pupillary distance, your forehead, your chin, how big your face is, and that could equal you. Your number is unique. There are not many people, supposedly, that have these kind of configurations, and they're getting scarily accurate. You know, even over time, it's interesting to see how certain points don't change that much on your body. I know, like, noses grow, faces sag, but where your eyeballs are in your sockets compared to your mouth, it doesn't change a lot, but it can. And I think that it's interesting to see how he created this n-tuple method in his daydream about building that machine they called a computer person. And years later, he recalled the wild excitement he felt as he conjured up a list of skills for artificial consciousness. And this is his quote. He said, "I wanted it to read printed characters on a page and hadn't written script as well. I could see it, or a part of it, in a small camera that would fit on my glasses, with an attached earplug that would whisper into my ears the names of my friends and acquaintances as I meet them on the street. For you see, my computer friend had the ability to recognize faces." So he was looking at not only what he wanted it to do, but how he wanted to use it. And I can already see how, like you imagine like something like a Google Glass or something that's on your eyeball that you look around and it'll go, like somebody's name will pop up, like that's Heather Biederman. She works as a librarian and you met her at this place. It'll give you a list of information. Is allergic to peanut butter? I'm not. But like things that might be helpful and useful. I could see somebody really wanting something like that, and he was looking for something to fill that role already back then. So I thought that was pretty amazing. Yeah. Okay. Let me just see. So he struck out with Browning and the third Sandia colleague to found a company of their own called Panoramic Research Incorporated. And it was based at first in Palo Alto, California, in what was now not yet known as Silicon Valley, but it became. So obviously a precursor. At the time, most of the world's computers, massive machines that stored data on punch cards or magnetic tape, resided in large corporate offices and government labs. Panoramic couldn't afford one of its own, so they ended up leasing computing time from their neighbors, often late into the evenings when it was cheaper. So that was common practice because people who worked with computers couldn't always afford a computer. So this panoramic business that Woody later described to a colleague, trying out ideas which we hoped would move the world, according to Nels Winkless, a writer and consultant who collaborated on several panoramic projects and later became a founding editor of Personal Computing magazine. Their function was literally to do what other people find just too silly. So they're trying things, they're experimenting, and it was almost like sci-fi thinking, going beyond what was normal and what was expected. It was pretty impressive. The company attracted an odd and eclectic mix of researchers, not the normal computer guys that you picture, many of whom, like Woody, had grown up with nothing during the Great Depression and now wanted to explore everything. It was like an artistic renaissance of computer science. It was amazing. So they ranged from brilliant to feral. So Browning, who had came from a family of poor farmers, had spent 2 years of his youth eating almost nothing but cabbage and was perpetual tinkerer. It reminds me of my own grandfather, who was like an eccentric guy, but amazing and multi-talented. And it was sort of, there was like that kind of person really came out around that time. You had people who were singers and they liked to make computers and were woodworking and painting. And it was definitely a time for the Renaissance man. And these are the kind of people that it was attracting. So another panoramic researcher, Larry Bellinger, he developed the concept for canine-powered truck called Dogmobile, which that grabbed my interest right away. They also built something called Hear-A-Light, a pen-shaped device for blind people that translated light levels into sound. So a new way of thinking about how to translate your environment to yourself. And maybe they would make it into an alarm clock. Maybe it would be for like looking at stuff, like you could use it to read. There are so many ways it could go. So Bellinger, who had worked as a wing walker as a teenager, he kept the pastime secret from his mother by playing off his bruises from bad parachute landings and bicycle injuries. So wing walkers would be, airplanes were kind of a novelty still, even after the war, but people would pay money to watch people do daredevil things like walking on airplane wings, hence the name wing walker. So this guy was a crazy pants, brilliant computer programmer and engineer who also walked on wings of airplanes. How many genius people do you know who also do things like that? It was just such a different kind of crew, and of course they're making amazing things that we still are talking about to this day. He helped design the Bell X-1, the sound-breaking rocket plane that was made famous in Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff. You've seen that movie. Later, he created what was called the Mobot, a self-propelled lawnmower for cutting grass in a completely random and unattended manner. It was on The Tonight Show, and now people have them. People have the self-robot lawnmowers doing their thing. So we live in the future. And then there was Helen Chan Wolf, a pioneer in robot programming who started at Panoramic a couple years out of college. She would go on to help program Shaky the robot, described by the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers as the world's first robot to embody artificial intelligence. She has been called, by one former colleague, the Lady Ada Lovelace of robotics. So they had a woman in their group. I still want someone to make this movie. Make this movie. It would be cool. In the early 1960s, when Wolf's coding efforts could involve stacks of punch cards from a foot and a half high, she was awed by the range of ideas her Panoramic colleagues threw at a wall. At one point, she says Woody decided that he wanted to unravel DNA. Why not? And he figured out that it would take 30 to 37 years to do it on computers that we had at the time. And I said, well, I guess we won't do that. Perhaps not surprisingly, Panoramic struggled to find adequate commercial funding. They were kind of out there. Their ideas were out there. So Woody did his best to pitch character recognition technology to business clients, including Equitable Life Assurance Society and McCall's Magazine. Woody was all but certain the company would fold, because they never actually landed a contract with them. But throughout its existence, Panoramic had at least one seemingly reliable patron that helped keep it afloat. The CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. If any direct mentions of the CIA ever existed in Woody's papers, they likely ended up in the ashes in his driveway. Yep. So the CIA is definitely behind a lot of the innovations we see today on facial recognition software. Winkless, who was friendly with the entire Panoramic staff, and was a lifelong friend of Browning, said that the company was likely formed, at least in part, with agency funding in mind. Nobody ever told me in so many words, he recalls, but that was the case. So people were working there and they didn't really know who was funding it. It was mostly the CIA. And that was the only reason they really stayed afloat as long as they did. So according to records obtained by the Black Vault, and that's like, I want to check that out, is a website that specializes in esoteric Freedom of Information Act requests. So the Black Vault, remember that. Panoramic was among 80 organizations that worked on Project MK Ultra. Look that up. The CIA's infamous mind control program. So they worked on the mind control program stuff too. This Panoramic was amazing. I mean, I just kind of wish I could time travel and watch what happened there. It's really cool. Through a front called the Medical Sciences Research Foundation. And they tortured people. This Project MK Ultra used psychological torture on frequently unwilling human subjects. Panoramic seems to have been assigned to sub-projects 93 and 94, the study of bacterial and fungal toxins, and the remote directional control of activities and selected species of animals. So they did some animal testing too. It shows that research by David Price, an anthropologist at St. Mary's University, showed that Woody and his colleagues also received money from the Society for Investigation of Human Ecology, a CIA front that provided grants to scientists whose work might improve the agency's interrogation techniques or act as camouflage for that work. The CIA would neither confirm nor deny any knowledge of or connection to Woody or Panoramic. Legal disclaimer. So, but it was another front company called King Hurley Research Group that bankrolled Woody's most notable research at Panoramic. According to a series of lawsuits filed in the 1970s, King Hurley was a shell company that the CIA used to purchase planes and helicopters for an agency's secret air force, known as Air America. Air America. For a time, King Hurley also funded psychopharmacological research at Stanford. But in the early 1963, it was a recipient of a different sort of pitch from Woody Bledsoe. He proposed a study to determine the feasibility of simplified facial recognition machine. Building on his and Browning's work with the N-tuple method, he intended to teach a computer to recognize 10 faces. That is, he wanted to give the computer a database of 10 photos of different people and see if he could get it to recognize new photos of them, each of them. Soon, one would hope to extend the number of persons to thousands, Woody wrote. Within a month, King Hurley had given the go-ahead. So it's great for surveillance. You could just set up a computer, you set up like that to watch people. And when you see someone comes in and goes, so-and-so came in, it recognizes them. So 10 faces now seems like it's teeny goal, right? But 1963, it was pretty breathtakingly ambitious. The leap from recognizing written characters to faces is a very long distance for computers to understand, especially when you know what they used to be like. So today's researchers can train their algorithms to millions of freely available selfies. People post things all the time. Like, I'm posting this right now. And you can learn, a computer can learn who I am, learn what I look like, learn about that. But back then, there was not the technology to do so. They made the technology. But there was a bigger problem. Three-dimensional faces on living human beings, unlike two-dimensional letters on a page, are not static. You're moving. Your face looks different in different angles. You could be up close. You could be far away. It's true. So it makes not only the math difficult, but the 3D element adds another whole. It says it's like the computing power would have to be far greater than what they originally expected. So they knew that they had these challenges in the beginning. So Woody adopted a divide and conquer approach, breaking the research into pieces and assigning them to different panoramic researchers. They got to work on the digitization problem. They had a scanning device to convert pictures into data points. They made it so they thought it was too many data points for it to process, so they had to figure out how to handle it all at once. They chopped the image into sections so it can go through, look at all of it, and that way it's not going to crash the computer. And so it was kind of amazing. But as a group, they all worked together and they made it happen. So they snapped portraits, one of the subject facing front, another from turned to 45 degrees. And the whole purpose was that they use these crosses. You remember in that image I showed you earlier. Let me see if I can find it again. The idea was to make sure, I'll show it one more time. There. I'm going to turn them sideways. You get the idea. With all the lines. And you turn it, and the computer has a difficult time adjusting. So they rotated it by 15-30 degrees. They kept trying, and they would feed a black and white image, and they would find that it could be remarkably accurate. What it would do is they would have the computer see it rotated, but then it would rotate it back to match up with what they had. So what it was doing was like going, that doesn't look quite right. Let's see if it matches anyone if I turn it. So it would understand that, yeah, you might not be the way I remember you, but if I put you this way, maybe you are. So they worked really hard to make it, but the solutions were ingenious but insufficient. 13 months after work began, they had not taught a computer to recognize a single human face, much less not 10 of them. Triple threat of hair growth, beards, facial expressions, like smiling, angry, sad. Your face looks different in different expressions. So there's a lot of variability. So they couldn't get it to work then. More studies had to be funded to attempt to complete a new approach towards tackling facial recognition. So they didn't succeed in 1964. They kept going though. Following year, Woody came to believe that the most promising path included to reduce a face to a set of relationships between its major landmarks: eyes, ears, nose, eyebrows, lips. The system that he imagined was similar to what Alphonse Bertillon, the French criminologist who invented the modern mugshot, had thought in 1879. So people had a basis of 11 physical measurements, including length of the left foot, length of the elbow to the end of the middle finger. And the idea is if you took enough measurements, every person was unique. Although the system was labor intensive, it worked. In 1897, years before fingerprinting became widespread, French gendarmes, which they used to call it, were used to identify the serial killer named Joseph Botcher. So it's so interesting to see how science is used to catch criminals, to make our lives simpler, but to come up with that math and science, we need it. So I'm trying to kind of skim ahead because I realize I'm getting starving. But so they made the experiment and they matched, they explored man-machine with facial recognition. And the CIA's Office of Research and Development mentions a project in 1965, the same year. So the research behind this, I think, is interesting. Is yes, there's documentation of the projects they're working on, but finding it, how it actually came from the CIA, was the actual difficult thing, because there are mentions in the CIA archives of different projects, but they're classified just enough so they don't say who it is. But if you match it up and you see what they're working on and who they're talking about, you can put it two and two together, and you can figure they actually were funding these groups like Panoramic. So it is kind of interesting. And you kind of wonder what wasn't said, what things have been hidden so much that they aren't even mentioned in the research. So I think it's kind of cool. So they figured out how to do larger scale versions of the experiment with the measurements, and they called something, they made something called a RAND tablet, an $18,000 device that looks like a flatbed image scanner, but worked kind of more like an iPad. It's a stylus. A researcher could draw on the tablet and produce a relatively high-resolution computer-readable image. So you had some undergraduates help cycle through a new batch of photographs using that RAND tablet and pinpointing key features on a stylus. It was arduous, but much faster when you had humans involved in it. So how to make it so it jumps from the human-assisted data facial recognition to being something that was completely done by a computer. When they were doing it, they would go through about 2,000 images, and they would include at least two of each face at a rate of about 40 images in an hour, which is really pretty slow. So even with a larger sample size, the team struggled to overcome all the usual obstacles. The computer still had trouble with the smiles, distort the face, and it would change it. Aging remained a problem too, because Woody's own face, he had one from 1945 and one from 1965, and the computer was confused as heck. It saw a little resemblance between the younger man with his toothy smile and dark widow's peak, and the older one with a grim expression and thinning hair. I'm old and crabby. And so it was as decades had created a different person. And in some ways it does. That's very poetic. But it isn't true. And they found a way around it. He got tired of hustling for new contracts for Panoramic. Woody was tired of it. And you could tell by his crabby face that he says he's in this ridiculous position of either having too many jobs or not enough. And he didn't like being constantly pitching new ideas to funders. Some treading into territory that could now be considered ethically dubious. So in March 1965, some 50 years before China would begin using facial pattern matching to identify people in their provinces, Woody had proposed to the Defense Department Advanced Research Project Agency, known as ARPA, that it should support Panoramic to study the feasibility of using facial characteristics to determine a person's racial background. That's horrible. It was extensive and valuable store of data collected over the years. Considerable expense and effort had not been properly exploited. It is unclear whether ARPA agreed to fund the project. It is clear that Woody was investing thousands of his own dollars in Panoramic with no guarantee of getting back. Meanwhile, his friends at the University of Texas at Austin had been urging him to come work there, dangling the promise of steady salary. I know, it's so steady and sexy working in education, but, so he had been a young man doing great things, so he finally decided stability wins. He had left Panoramic in 1966, and the firm appears to have folded soon after. Without Woody moving it forward, it was done. So his daydreams of building a computer person still playing in his head, Woody moved his family to Austin, Texas, to dedicate himself to the study and teaching of automated reasoning. But his work on facial recognition wasn't over. Its culmination was just around the corner. Bum, bum, bum. So in 1967, he took on one last assignment for facial recognition patterns in the human face. The purpose of the experiment was to help law enforcement agencies quickly sift through databases of mugshots and portraits looking for matches, as many things are. It's related to criminals and crime. So funding for the project appears to have come from the U.S. government. Again, 1967 document declassified by the CIA mentions an external contract for a facial recognition system that would reduce search time by 100-fold. This time, the record suggests the money came through an individual acting as an intermediary and an email. The apparent intermediary declined to comment. So, they found that it was so good that it dominates the humans in facial searching. So, he had a database of about 800 images, and he must have figured out the thing that was holding them up. The newsprint quality photos of each 400 adult male Caucasians. They used RAND tablet. They recorded 46 coordinates per photo, including 5 on each ear, 7 on the nose, 4 on each eyebrow. And so Woody's earlier experience at normalizing variations in the image used a mathematical equation to rotate each head in a forward-looking expression position. Then, to account for differences in scale, they enlarge or reduce each image to a standard size. So if you're back here and the head was a little bit different shape, they moved you forward until you just about fit where it would be. And they moved you so you would be right there. And so they enlarge or reduce. They try to keep the pupillary distance to be one of the key factors in how you can find out who you are. That's why so often when people are trying to hide their facial recognition, they have things that kind of cover the face, distort where the pupillary distance is, have black spots to make the computer think that the eyes are in weird places. There's lots of ways around it. And then they use decision theory. It used 22 measurements to make an educated guess about the whole. So there's shortcuts in matching, and they found that the computer could do it, and it handled the tasks well. So more importantly, they blew their human competitors out of the water. When Woody and Hart asked 3 people to cross-match subsets of 100 faces, even the fastest took 6 hours to finish. The CDC 3800 computer completed a similar task in about 3 minutes. So it beat the pants off of humans, reaching 100-fold reduction in time. Humans were better at coping with head rotation and poor photographic quality, Woody and Hart acknowledged, but the computer is vastly superior at tolerating the differences caused by aging. Overall, they concluded the machine dominates, or very nearly dominates, the humans. So this is the beginning where it turned around, 1967. And this was the greatest success Woody had ever had with facial recognition research. It was also the last paper he would write on the subject. The paper, which was never made public for government reasons. It makes me crazy. Hart says, which both men laminated. They were that proud of it. In 1970, 2 years after the collaboration with Hart ended, a roboticist named Michael Kassler alerted Woody to facial recognition study that Leon Harmon at Bell Labs was planning. He said, "I'm irked that this second-rate study will now be published to and appear to be the best man-made man-machine system available," Woody replied. "It sounds to me like Leon, if he works hard, will be almost 10 years behind us by 1975. And then it says Woody must have been frustrated when Harmon's research made the cover of Scientific American a few years later, while his own more advanced work was essentially kept in a vault because the government wanted it to be. So, Woody won awards for his contributions to automated reasoning and served for a year as president of the Association for Advancement of Artificial Intelligence. So don't feel like he was left behind on everything, but his work in facial recognition would go largely unrecognized and all but forgotten while others picked up the mantle. In 1973, a Japanese computer scientist named Takeo Kanade made a major leap in facial recognition technology, using what was then a very rare commodity, a database of 850 digitized photographs. Then, mostly during the 1970 World's Fair in Japan, Kanade developed a program that could extract facial features such as nose, mouth, eyes without human input. Kanade had finally managed Woody's dream of eliminating the man from the man-machine system. So they didn't have to use the tablet where you'd have to show where the things were, where the chin is, where your eyes are. It could do it on its own. Woody did dredge up his expertise in facial recognition on one or two occasions over the years. In 1982, he was hired as an expert witness in a criminal case in California. An alleged member of the Mexican Mafia was accused of committing a series of robberies in Contra Costa County. The prosecutor had several pieces of evidence, including surveillance footage of a man with a beard, sunglasses, a winter hat, and long curly hair. But mugshots of the accused showed a clean-shaven man with short hair. Woody went back to panoramic research to measure the bank robber's face and compare it to the pictures of the accused. Much to the defense attorney's pleasure, Woody found that the faces were likely of two different people because the noses differed in width. It just didn't fit, he said. Though the man still went to prison, he was acquitted on the 4 counts that were related to Woody's testimony. So only in the past 10 years or so has facial recognition started to become capable of dealing with real-world imperfection. So Michigan State University and co-editor of the Handbook of Face Recognition, Anna K. Jane, said that for one thing, there's now an inexhaustible supply of digitalized imagery, so computers can learn. So you combine it with AI, and it's unstoppable. Anything from a human face to a bag of chips, it can figure out the difference. So to kind of sum it up, it's come so far since the 1960s. But Woody has defined many of the problems that the field still sets out to solve. His process of normalizing the variability of facial position, for instance, remains part of the picture. Without his work, it wouldn't be where it is today. Deep networks often realign a face to a forward posture using landmarks in the face. And though today's deep learning-based systems aren't told by a human programmer to identify noses and eyebrows, Woody's turn in that direction in 1965 sent a course afield for decades. The first 40 years were dominated by this feature-based method, said Kanade, now professor at Carnegie Mellon's Robotics Institute. Now, in a way, the field has returned to something like Woody's earliest attempts in unriddling the human face, when it was used a variation on the n-tuple method to find patterns of similarities in a giant field of data points. As complex as facial recognition systems have become, they're really just creating similarity scores for a pair of images and seeing how they compare. So more importantly, Woody's work set an ethical tone for research on facial recognition that has been enduring and problematic. Unlike other world-changing technologies whose apocalyptic capabilities became apparent only after years in the wild, see social media, YouTube, quadricopter drones, the potential abuses of facial recognition technology were apparent from almost its birth at Panoramic. Many of the biases that we may write off as being relics of Woody's time. The sample set skewed almost entirely towards white men because that's how the computers learned. They seemingly blithe trust in government authority that they won't use it or abuse it for bad reasons. Of course they might. The temptation to use facial recognition to discriminate between races continue to dog the technology today. It had to come from somewhere. So understanding where this came from, understanding where it's going, I think it's an important part of it. And that's why I wanted to highlight this today, that Amazon's recognition software misidentified 28 NFL players as criminals. Days later, the ACLU sues the U.S. Justice Department, the FBI, and the DEA to get information for their use of facial recognition technology produced by Amazon, Microsoft, and other companies. In 2019, a report from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which tested code for more than 50 developers of facial recognition software, found that white males are falsely matched with mugshots less frequently than other groups. In 2018, a pair of academics wrote a broadside against the field. We believe facial recognition technology is the most uniquely dangerous surveillance mechanism ever invented. So, it's a polarizing topic. It's definitely one that I think about all the time. I mean, we have this show, and I make sure that you are aware of what's going on. But the history behind it is kind of fascinating. So in 1993, Woody's ALS began causing his speech to slur. And according to a long tribute written after his death, he continued to teach at University of Texas until his speech became unintelligible. And he kept up his research on automated reasoning until he could no longer even hold a pen. Always the scientist, wrote the authors. Woody made tapes of his speech so he could chronicle the process of the disease. He died on October 4th, 1995. His obituary in the Austin American-Statesman made no mention of his work on facial recognition. In the picture that ran alongside it, a white-haired Woody stares directly at camera, a big smile spread across his face. And that's him being happy, and he can let it go. So, I'm going to post a few pictures and see if there's more information about Woody Bledsoe. I hope this was informative and interesting to you. We're going to play around with the timing of this. I'm not sure if it's going to be 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock probably, just because it's easier to get set up. But watch for me next week. We're going to do Thursday again, and hopefully we can get this a little more evened out. But thanks for hanging out with me today. I really hope that you enjoyed learning about facial recognition history, and it makes you think about how the CIA and our government have been involved from the very beginning, and wonder what they're up to now. What are they investigating? What are they funding? Look into some of these sites I mentioned earlier. There is a lot of good information out there that people are digging up all the time, and just be aware that there are good benefits out of technology that can help us in our lives every day, but that doesn't mean we always should use them. So have a great week, guys. I love getting to hang out with you. You make my day a little bit better, and I hope you have a fabulous Friday tomorrow and a great weekend, and I will see you next week. So see you later.